And well, thank you for sharing, number one. I think it's really honest sort of assessment. I think, sure. It's fascinating to me because we knew each other before you were at Facebook, before you had money, and you were at AOL. I was just sold my company there, and we were just two dorky kids trying to, and probably shared a lot of DNA. Both of us, didn't have ideal childhoods. Both of us just trying to make it their way in the world. And then you got to this point where you felt like, I'm not happy anymore, and why am I trying to impress these other people? What's the core of that? Why were you trying to be part of this like big, grand hedge fund world? Because you were so good at it. You went to that, what's that conference in New York where you picked?
Irisone. No, I was.
You were on the stage at the.
I was the best. We were running. I was running until we shut it down. Top 2% hedge fund in the world, and I was doing it an hour a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was an enormous amount of money, but I literally spent an hour a week doing that job, and it was a top 2% hedge fund.
Right. And you're invited to speak at the hedge fund of hedge fund conference.
And it's intoxicating because you're speaking, and I spoke about Box, and they show a little ticker, and Box literally rips up, and it's up like 50% from where it was. And you think, look at the positive impact I had on all these employees just by opening my mouth and blathering on.
Yeah.
It's a very intoxicating thing, but at the core of it is why? Because everybody wants to feel validated. And in the absence of being able to validate oneself from within, you will seek others to validate you. And what's dangerous about the world that we live in, which is entrepreneurship and technology, is that it is so in the bullseye of everybody else now. Everybody wants to be in it, around it, on top of it, under it, associated with it, funding it, being a part of it, employed by it, all of it is true. And so it's a very intoxicating, shiny object that people want to have around them. And so they will use whatever devices that they have to co-opt that. And in my case, it was a very practical equation, which is these governments, these pension funds, these family offices, these very famous, important people have all this money. They're like, Chamath, come here, blah, blah, blah. And you start to fall for it. And I fell for it. And I fell for it for a long time. And then eventually, again, the mythology starts to wane. And you realize, again, I'm sure you guys had this. Oh, this investor who I let into my cap table, who I thought was going to solve all my problems, turns out he's just as fucking stupid as I am. And it turns out, wait a minute, if I don't solve this problem, no one's going to solve this problem. Oh, wait a minute, this person that I hired on my team who was supposed to solve all my problems, not so much. If I don't help solve it, it's not going to get solved. It all goes back to this fundamental belief in oneself. And it was much easier for me to have that in small doses, in small things. Very difficult for me to have it in big doses in the things that mattered, until I went back and I fixed the core toolbox that I used to build myself up in the morning. And that took a long time.
And now what is social capital? The partnership's been dropped.
It will be what it always has been. I think look, when I read articles and you see all the negative press, and it was so weird because I'm about to publish our annual investor letter, and I'll just preview it to you for a second. Our returns are bananas, okay? I've made more in the last 8 years compared to the S&P than Buffett did in the first 8 years of Berkshire. Buffett did 1,000 points of alpha. I did 1,800 points of alpha. My returns are double Buffett's. And that's that's not including Bitcoin, Amazon, and the Warriors, which I did off balance sheet in my own money. So there was nothing to numerically complain about. The job that we were doing. But I was so empty because I was like, we're not doing the job that we were supposed to be doing.
Which was investing in healthcare, education.
Not even in investing. The point is you need to be there to basically take a stand on issues. And I have the bully pulpit to do it. We had the capital to do it, but we weren't doing it in as much of a way that we should have been. Climate change still ripping away unabated. What is anybody doing about it? Education is eroding at the seams. What is anybody really doing about it? Drug costs through the ceiling. The United States healthcare system worse and worse and worse every year, even though we spend more and more and more. What is anybody really doing about it? And the answer is not as much as it needs to be done.
Yeah. And certainly not as much.
And so that's not a conversation of investing or IRRs or blah, blah, blahs. It's about ideas and it's about people and it's about drawing a line in the sand and doing things. And I was good at that for a while and then I stopped focusing on it. And so what we are today is an attempt to get back to where we started and what we should have always been, which is really interesting ways of solving very difficult problems that, if they are solved, matter in the world. A very long-term byproduct of that will be more capital. I suspect enormous amounts, way more than a traditional investing job will do. But that's a byproduct, because when you measure and quantify the absolute value of progress, it's way more enormous than measuring the absolute value of discounted cash flows. And that's what people don't get. And they get lost in all of this stuff. And particularly now, when tech is so hot and so interesting and blah, 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 it's easy to lose sight of what's really important. So we are permanent capital, starting with $2 billion of my own money. We are investing as much as we need for as long as we want in the things that are important. And what's great about that is that there's no LPs. There's no decision making that isn't just about a group of us that are very technical and product oriented, can ask and answer extremely important technical questions. And then we have an entire network of people around us that is wholly different than what they were. Partnerships with the Salk Institute, partnerships with MIT, partnerships with Xerox PARC, partnerships with 40 postdocs, doing all kinds of really interesting research in the world so we can learn from these folks who are really on the ground, selflessly trying to solve important issues in the world. And when we can translate, when we can learn, then we can go off and do interesting things. And those companies now, Jason, that we really started in Fund 1, are doing exceptionally well. I used to do this thing every quarter where I would ask the team, hey guys, tell me all of our companies what you think the exits will be. And I always used it for two reasons. One, to validate that whatever they thought was going to happen wasn't. And two, was who was obvious and should be fired first. Because it's very easy for some numbskull to basically say, oh, well, this one with the most revenue is worth the most money, right? That's easy. But how hard is it for someone to actually project forward what the real value of a market and a business should be, and how things should be changed and manipulated and morphed to max value? And I find that there were a few people who were consistently really good at it. They're still here. And so I'm happy to be around folks that can actually see the forest from the trees this way. I remember we put in a few $1 million around this idea of small-scale satellites. And this entrepreneur, she was superb, and she could not get a meeting. And what's so lucky for us is we met her after an entire, fakakta process where all the traditional folks were like, no. And we gave her what she needed, et cetera, et cetera. And she is literally off to the races, off to space, launching an entire constellation that'll basically become like an alternative low-cost version of the internet. Mega huge multi-trillion-dollar, close to trillion-dollar companies talk about it. They blather on about it. They do fucking keynotes about it. She's done it. And she's done it with $3 million. That's bananas.
Yeah.
And so I need to be around people like her.